Hello, I'm Rick Delmonte, Managing Director at the Beck Group. We are an integrated architecture and construction firm. In this project, I'm going to be presenting a case study for the first IPD healthcare project in Texas. I'm going to cover two things on this project, the IPD contract and process, as well as the use of BIM in the project. The project also had some fairly extensive lean and prefabrication processes, but I'll cover that on another presentation. So let's begin. The project itself was done by THR, Texas Health Resources. It was the Methodist Alliance Hospital in Fort Worth, Texas. This hospital was approximately 188,000 square feet, $46.5 million. It had a $10 million MOB next door. We're going to focus on the hospital for this portion of it. And the advantage that this process had for the owner was that the owner had completed a project of identical scale within the last year. One of the challenges on the IPD process is really trying to figure out what is a fair budget for the owner, given the fact that he's not typically going through a hard bid competitive process. And in this case, we had the THR Presbyterian Hospital in Flower Mound. So it was this program that they began with. The final cost of this was $43.5. So that became the baseline for this new IPD project that they wanted to work. So we began on the project. These are the renderings that were done by Perkins and Will for the project. So a series of renderings had been produced for the project. This is the eventual BIM model that we did. So, as I said, the contractual issues were that Perkins and Will in Dallas is the architect. They had not done a previous IPD project. They had no lean experience. Beck is the contractor. It's an internally integrated firm, so we've worked together, but no formal IPD experience, and this is really our first lean project. The owner's representative, Denton Wilson, had become sort of national spokesman for IPD and lean. He left about halfway through the project after setting the job up, and we'll talk a little bit about what that meant to the job once we lost him. And I would say that it had a unique selection process, particularly for the contractors. So Denton is a very creative man, and so in order to select the best contractor, he set up a system whereby he issued a short list of 5 firms, went through a series of interviews, narrowed it down to 2 firms. And on those 2 firms, he created a process in which each of these 2 firms would work for 3 weeks with the architect. They would work on logistics, tools, so forth. And at the end of that period, the team came up with a scorecard on which each of the contractors would be judged. This was based on chemistry, technology, lean attitude, cost, schedule. And so after 3 weeks of working together, in which they were paid, the owner and the architect then selected Beck to move forward with the project. So we begin with this project. The initial budget, as I mentioned before, was $43.5. They came back at some point and decided they wanted to increase the scope. And based on the calculated square footage, decided that scope would get them to $46,500,000. When we did the initial design estimate for that, the budget came in at $49,500,000. So at this point, we were starting $3 million over budget already. And then you'll see eventually we ended up adding $2.5 million in mechanical upgrades that they were hoping to get in the building, but didn't put in initially because of the budget. But the final cost of the whole thing had to be $46,500,000. So let's talk a little bit about the contractual issues. So this was a formal AIA IPD contract, which frankly is fairly rare because it's difficult for most people to sign. So it's the C-191, which is a multi-party agreement. It's similar to a C-195, but it doesn't require the formation of a limited liability corporation. Again, that gets even more difficult for corporations and particularly public entities to sign. So they didn't have to do that, but we did do a multi-party agreement. We agreed not to sue each other fundamentally. Now, the typical 191 is a cost-plus model. You submit your costs, and any profit that you get is based on meeting project criteria, cost, schedule, etc. In this one, the owner decided that the contractor would have a GMP, a guaranteed maximum price. The architect would have a fixed fee. And then what they would do is Off of that, they would then take a certain amount and put it at risk. So the project began $3 million above the baseline goal, and the project ended 800,000 below the budget, and we had managed to the team added 2.5 million in added value. No credit given for added value. I will come back to that when you see, because it's one of the issues that happens when you work in a truly collaborative process and you continuously try to make the building better. So the incentive plan basically said, we're going to take 0.5% from both Beck and Perkins and Will, $230,000 each, and we're going to put that at risk. So you have to meet a series of criteria in order to get that back. Beyond that, then there was a savings criteria, another 230,000. Now at this point, you're splitting it with the owner. So Beck was eligible for 230,000, Perkins and Will 230,000, and THR 460. That was their 50% of that additional tranche of savings. That was based on savings below the budget, coming in below the budget, and also on the fact that it was on a scorecard. Now, beyond the $1,380,000, any savings beyond that would be split equally between the owner, the architect, and the contractor. Here's an image of the building going up under construction. Again, the building, the blue and the green image is the hospital itself. The white image on the top of the sheet is the MOB. So that first tranche that I told you about, again, you're putting some of your fee at risk. And to get your fee recovered, you fundamentally had to meet 4 factors. Overall client satisfaction achieved, and that was their decision. Were they satisfied? That the final cost was less than the target cost, that you met the substantial completion on the date you promised, and that finally, based on the owner's criteria, that the quality met his standards. The second tranche of money, the second $230,000, was the project savings incentive distribution based on the average survey score from a 20-question survey taken by the team. So the team would take this survey every month, and it was used to judge the progress of the team. This is very much a lean process. So an example of these questions would be, team members demonstrate trust and respect across all levels. Project participant time is used wisely. The team successfully incorporates and executes the building information modeling for the betterment of the project. There were 20 of these, and based on what the average score was, that's the multiplier that you use to determine what percentage of the additional savings, if there was any, each of the team members would get. So here's what the charts would look like. These surveys would be done every month, and at the end, it took an individual, one of the project engineers probably spent 8 hours compiling it and putting it together. So it looked like this, a series of bar charts. Team maintains open, clear communication. This is a chart for the incentive plan. Again, you can see the score in this one. The previous one was for 1 month. This is obviously all the way through the job, and you can see how the scores move up and down. Now, one of the advantages of one of these scorecards is that it kind of gives you a heads up when things are not going well on the project. So as you look at this scorecard, when you begin to see a dip, when you see it going down to 6.7, you know something's going on in the job. And that was very much a signal for Denton and other team members to really come back, examine, and try and understand what the factors were that were causing that negative score. So, and there was a core group of the people from the team working on the project, and there was also an executive group, a level above that sort of took this scorecard. Now, in the core group, this is an interesting one again, how the project, the average of all the questions. What's interesting about that, if you notice, there's a dip right in month 5 in 2011. And that dip right there, when Denton began to investigate this, he recognized that the owner had put in a new project manager on the project, a day-to-day project manager on the site. That project manager disrupted the process, did not get along with the team, and the scores immediately dropped. And that was a signal that allowed Denton to correct the situation, basically replace this individual because of the destructive impact he was having on the team. And I'm not sure that without this kind of scoring, anonymous scoring, that we would have had the information to be able to convince Denton that something needed to be done. And if you worked on many projects, you know oftentimes it's extremely difficult to replace one of the owner's representatives, even if he's causing major problems for the team. So I'll take you through this project budget. And one thing that I would say is that in talking to Denton and the team, this was one of the first projects they did. It is probably more complex than it needed to be. And so I'll try and walk you through it. So what you're seeing here is that the orange line is the current estimate on all these different points in time. So the bottom bar is obviously the dates. The vertical bar is the amount of money. So as I mentioned before, the red line at this point is fundamentally the budget. So the budget began, as I mentioned, at 43.5. We began at 49.5. So as we came in there, we began to chip away at the budget, value engineering, other efforts to get the budget down. And then when you begin to see this orange line, which is our current estimate, you begin to see that it's climbing. The reason it's climbing is that additional scope was added into the job. So finally, at this point, the owner decided he recognized that additional scope was in, and he increased the budget by $3 million. So now this is the point at which you're at $46,500,000. Now you can see finally the orange line and the red line meet, and so now we're at budget level. But this is, and particularly in the lean process, the idea is you don't just hit the budget and go on, but you continue to try and find ways in which you can save money. Now for this project, there were a whole series of things, and like I said, I can cover them in another one, but there was a great deal of prefabrication and other processes that began to accumulate the savings. But what happened is that, as you can see, sort of this blue line is the original cost line based on the original scope. As we began to save money, what the owner began to do was say, well, now that I've got some extra money, I would like a little better mechanical system. I want an electrical generator that can cover, the summer air conditioning. And so that entire green zone right there is money that the team saved, which the owner then reinvested into making the building better. One of the challenges in IPD, again, is you have sacrificed some of your profit in order to guarantee that you can drop the price. So all of this money really belonged to the team, but in fact was reinvested back into the building. So when Denton left and another person took over, one of the challenges we had was that he did not recognize the fact that at this point, this green area was additional value that really needed to be credited back to the team and allowed to be used into their additional profit calculations. So at the end of the day, the owner came in and said, you hit our budget exactly. I think we were $800,000 below the budget, but there was a tremendous amount of value. It was $2.5 million worth of additional value that had been generated on the project. So here's a sheet, and again, this was created by an engineer, so it's a little more complex than it needs to be. But the total savings, after discussion with the owner, there was $800,000 in savings, and he agreed to kick in another $659,000 for the additional value that was added into the building. So he agreed to say, okay, I'll let you all acknowledge $1,469,000 in savings on the project. So we went back to the 4 questions: fee at risk, return to partners. Did we achieve client satisfaction? Final cost less than target cost? Substantial completion achieved? And then design and construction quality meets the owner standard. They all were yes. So Perkins and Will was paid out of a separate contract for their $262,000 that they had at risk. Beck was also compensated for their $262,000, but the money for their compensation came out of the calculation for the overall savings. So if you take the $262,000 out of the $1,469,000, that left you with $1,207,000 savings for the next tranche. And if you remember, that next tranche was going to be split 50% for the owner, $460,000, and 50% for Beck and Perkins and Will. And so the overall score that we did on the survey came in at 90%. So you take the $262,000, you multiply it by 90%, and you get $235,000. So now at this point, Beck and Perkins and Will have received another $235,000. The owner has received $460,000. And then finally, when you get here, what you're left with, once you subtract all of these from the $1,469,000, you get $222,000. And if you remember, any number below this line now is split equally between all 3 team members. So all three team members are credited with 55,000, but because the 90% team survey, everybody gets $50,000. So at the end of the day, in terms of the total savings distribution, the owner received 584,000, and then Beck and Perkins and Will received $311,000. Um, and again, as you can see, I think that if you look at it, the owner had a great deal, and that's not a bad thing. But the owner got, not only did he get $484,000 of additional savings that were accomplished, but he also got an additional $1.5 million in added value that was kicked into the project with betterment, with better mechanical systems and other elements. Now, the lessons that came out of this, when we finish the job, we look back on it, and one of the things that I would say is that the reward structure has to be sufficient to compensate, particularly the architect, for all the additional work. There's a lot more time, a lot more meetings that have to take place in order to do this totally collaborative sort of process. Perkins and Will have been used to working with for-profit hospitals in which it was very clear-cut. They could very quickly produce their designs, very quickly produce the documents and move forward. And in this one, they felt like they were spending a great deal more time than they normally did and felt like they weren't really getting compensated enough. When I had conversations, and I went back as I did this case study and talked to the folks at Perkins and Will, the actual team members that worked on the job, the project architect and the project manager on the job, they loved the process. They loved being in a very collaborative environment. It was the conflict resolution, the ability to work together. But when I talked to the principal in charge of the project, he wasn't crazy about this. And the reason he wasn't crazy about it is because in his world, he needs to project profit for a job. So when Perkins and Will National comes to him and says, "Okay, give me your projection. How much money are you going to make on this job? What is your profit projection?" Because of the way this was done, and because the budget was continuously varying, he could not predict how much money he was going to make, and that made him very nervous. And in the end, he said, "Why don't you just give me a little more money for the collaborative process instead of giving me this incentive?" I'm not sure this is a consistent point of view, but in the situation that he was in and the way that he had to report, he felt like that would make him feel better than the uncertainty of not really knowing how much money you're going to get at the end. Another mistake that we made was that basically the structural and MEP engineers were not given additional fee to participate in this process. So all of the benefits of the IDP were given to Perkins and Will. So the engineers that were working under them did not get that. And so I believe that they collaborated about as much as they could within this project, but at some point they were just running out of money. They were doing a standard fee, but being asked to really consider many more options, go to many more meetings. And I think that in the future, if you want to have really good results, you've got to have all the team members who've got to be vested and have got to be a reward at the end. And then finally, without an active and supportive owner, the process will not succeed. When Denton was there, he had tremendous enthusiasm, energy. It really drove that team. They carried the momentum forward, but again, once he left, I think it became very difficult, and there were things that he put in place as far as the compensation for the project that never quite came to fruition after he left. Other owner representatives never quite understood it in the same way that he did. I'll say the waiver of liability was valuable in creating an environment of collaboration and BIM sharing. Currently, in this day and age, in most of the projects where we are a contractor work with another architect, we're given the use of a BIM model, but there's a tremendous indemnification document that has to be signed that says that they take no responsibility for anything that's in the model, that anything that they're reliable for is in the 2D drawings. So the ability for the architect to feel like I can let the contractor have the model without getting sued went a long way in terms of the collaboration that happened between us. And the last note I'll say is, in the later project, Denton is an interesting guy and always pushing the boundaries. And he went to work for another hospital group, Methodist, and this hospital group would not sign an IDP contract. They considered that too risky. And so Denton tried to put together a set of rewards and a collaborative process without an IPD contract. without having to fight the lawyers and all the other folks in the Methodist hospital. He said, okay, I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to create a system that was very similar to what I did at THR Alliance without the IDP contract. Beck was the owner on this one. RTKL was the architect. Um, I think he feels he was able to achieve equal results, and that the big factor is that the culture, the collaborative culture that you develop on a team, is as important as the structure, i.e., the IPD legal structure that you create. If you can create a culture of collaboration, then you can accomplish almost anything you can accomplish with an IPD contract. And so this is just at the end of the day, these were the final surveys, and it's interesting. In comparison to your normal process, do you find IPD to currently be beneficial to you? 16 out of 20 participants in the survey felt that way. And then this is the chart, and you can see where we began. 22% said yes. 78% said yes, and 22% said no. As the project went on, more and more people appreciated and felt IPD was beneficial, and by the end of the day, everybody thought it was worthwhile. So, talk a little bit about BIM, because it was kind of a critical element in this one. We signed AIE 202, which is basically a BIM protocol. How much detail are you going to put into this model? But we ended up referring a lot to the Perkins and Will BIM protocol because they had been working this for a long time. Now, one of the key parts of this thing is that the model, once you begin this collaborative process in the way that we were working, it's no longer primarily for 2D documentation. It's a tool that we use for estimating, coordination, and phasing. So to put that in perspective, most architects still use the 2D drawings or the contractual documents. So the BIM model, and please forgive me, I know it's a building information model, but the BIM model is used to make a better set of 2D drawings, better coordinated and quicker set of 2D drawings. And when you're using the model to create a set of 2D drawings primarily, and you don't see that model as being used very much in the construction process because you're giving the contract of that model only through indemnification, then you tend not to build things as accurately or as completely as you might. So when you see that model as a tool for estimating, coordination, and phasing, suddenly you have to begin modeling everything correctly. So as I'm saying, the accuracy of the model becomes critical. Floor and roof slope, walls needed modeled to the correct height. Instead of modeling every wall to go up to the lay-in ceiling, all the walls were correctly done. If they were to the lay-in ceiling, they stopped there. If they went to structure, they stopped there. We sloped for roof drains, all of the steel above. All of the things had to be done correctly. And then if you worked in Revit, you can use 2D content to sort of fill in. You don't have to put in a 3D toilet. You can draw a plan of a 2D toilet and so forth. But if you use 2D content to fill in the model, what ends up happening is it can no longer be used for estimating. So again, in this model, we kind of insisted that Perkins will follow some key BIM standards from Beck. I think it increased the effectiveness of the model, allows us to use the model for many more things. And Perkins and Will, at the end of the day, decided it really wasn't that onerous to do the model at that level. And I understand that they continue to use it in many of their other projects. So I put this in here. I call it BIM and IPD 2.0. Where do we go next? And this project, and I put these together 7 years ago, so we've gone pretty far in this area. One of them is separation of the model elements into objects that match the estimating elements. How you put together your components in Revit, and we use Revit particularly, in such a way that the way that they break down can easily be fed into the estimating program, so that there's an alignment between how it gets estimated and how it gets built. And then the other item which I put down was coding the library items into the cost database. This is now actually a pretty easy process because now you can use the program Assemble, and it links your Revit model into an estimating database and allows you to very quickly do calculations. The third one, focus on the model, not in drawings as a building tool to minimize notation errors. We're still not there yet. So I tell people I feel like we are kind of halfway across the desert, right? You're crossing this desert. You left the 2D world, but you're not completely in the 3D world. So we're using Revit, we're modeling these buildings, but we're still using the 2D drawings of the contractual drawings that the building is built from. The Revit model is treated by most architects as, again, a tool by which to create 2D drawings, but a tool by which they don't want to receive any liability. And so at some point, I think we need to continue to push that model forward until we get to the day when it really will be the model that is the determining element and not the 2D drawings. And the challenge that we have now is that as we hire young architects to draw these buildings, they know less and less about 2D documentation, and they are getting better and better at terms of modeling and developing this 3D model. So at some point, we really need to make that switch and be able to switch over to the model from the drawings. Model data feeding directly into layout equipment, Trimble, that's been going on for a while. And then when I say the last one, model generated by the team for the team, that just means, again, this model is not a tool that belongs to the architect in order to create 2D drawings, but really it's a model that is generated by the team. Parts of it may be developed by subcontractors, parts of it by the architect, parts of it by general contractor, but it's one that the entire team uses to collaborate with and to make a better project. The final thoughts on BIM, it's not a substitute for an experienced estimator. As we went along there, you may click carpet and it tells you you've got, 60 square yards of carpet, but an experienced estimator knows that there's a waste factor on carpet. You can't just price 60 square yards of carpet. So as we went through this thing, even though BIM was generating numbers, we always had an experienced estimator went back, looked at the numbers, and made calculations and make sure that it was accurate. The IPD liability waiver, I'm saying that true collaboration becomes more challenging. I think this is one of the biggest challenges we're facing right now in the industry, is how to deal with the liability and how to deal with the sharing of the model openly between two groups, because right now it's really still not happening. I note that she who controls the model controls the process. This is kind of, a warning to architects. I think I see a lot of architects that, again, often produce models that are not of very high standards. I see ourselves and other contractors building their own models because they can build them more accurately and more carefully, and they're putting it the way that it should be. But it worries me because at that point, then the contractor is the one that is taking care of all the coordination, all the sub input, and they then control the process. So for me, I would love to see the architect continue to be engaged, involved, and figure out how this becomes a truly collaborative process and not sort of this handoff. And this is hard to say, but I think the general standard of architectural documentation is currently pretty low. I think in the long run, this will hurt the profession because I think if we don't raise our standard for architectural documentation, I think architects are going to lose the documentation phase of the building process. So many people argue that we don't get paid to do higher quality. Somehow we have to collaborate in a process and determine who's best to develop the model and how do we pay them for doing that. And then I'll finish up here with some of the images of the building. You saw the previous building. This is a new completed building. The overall view, this is the lobby connecting the MOB and the hospital with the fountain in front. The evening views above this area. Lobby, one of the patient rooms. And then finally a comparison of the upper left is the new hospital, the lower right is the previous hospital. And in comparison in those two projects, the final results, this project, the new project, was delivered 3 months faster, cost the owner $584,000 less, contained $2.5 million of upgraded mechanical equipment that was not on the other project. And in my eye, I think it's a significantly upgraded design from the previous one. Overall, the project, the owner was extremely happy, and it was an extremely successful project, I think, for both Perkins and Will and Beck. And it's one that, like I say, I think we've tried to continue to bring in some of the things that we learned on this project on all the others. Thank you very much.